Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are on page 25 of your student journal, and our objective or our goal for the day is today I will compare fractions using benchmark fractions. Period. Okay, so let's talk about what these words mean. So in our vocabulary, our first thing we have is benchmark fractions. And it says they're common fractions that are used as a reference point to compare the value of other fractions. So 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, and often 1/10. So the main one we're going to be using today is 1/2. That's the most common benchmark fraction. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. We also see an area model example where they drew 3/5. So the denominator 5 means it was cut into 5 pieces. The numerator 3 means that 3 were shaded in. Then they compared it using the benchmark fraction 1/2, and then they drew the 1/8 as well. And from all these pictures, we were able to see that 3/5 is greater than 1/8. Now, we didn't necessarily need this benchmark fraction, but this is how they want us to do it, so we're going to add that in. Okay, we also could use a model of a number line. So here we see that the one whole was divided into 10 parts, and 3 were shaded. Here's our benchmark fraction, and then our other fraction, our whole was partitioned into 6 parts and 4 were shaded. So we see that 3/10 is less than 4/6. I always still remember that the alligator eats the larger fraction or the larger number. So our steps today are we're going to draw an area model for the number line to represent the fractions being compared. So an area model or a number line. Then we're going to divide the area model or number line into the fraction and shade and write our answer. Pretty much we're just going to be using models and drawing them to find our answer. Okay, so what does this look like? So here's my first problem, and I have 3/4 compared to 2/8. Now my directions say that I can use an area model or a number line. I'm going to practice both and take turns. So on this specific problem, I'm actually going to do the number line. So what I'm going to draw first is my first fraction is 3/4. Now, since I'm going to compare these, I want my number lines to be pretty similar and lined up. So it's not going to be very helpful if they're all different sizes and they're not lined up. So notice how I'm trying to keep them the same length and all on top of each other. So my first fraction I'm going to draw is 3/4. So the 4 denominator tells me I'm going to partition it into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. And the 3 tells me I have 3 of the parts. So that is 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. Okay, this is going to be my benchmark fraction of 1/2. So 1/2 is right in the middle. We can draw what 1/2 looks like. And then my fraction that I'm comparing it to is 2/8. So 2/8 means I need to partition this into 8 equal parts. So I'm going to do 1/2, then 1/4, and then partition those. And 2/8 would mean that I have 2 of the 8 pieces, which would be right here. This is where 2/8 is. So I can clearly see that 3/4 is larger than 1/2. 1/2 is larger than 2/8, which means 3/4 has to be larger than 2/8. So I'm going to grab the larger, which means I'm going to put a greater than sign. So 3/4 is greater than 2/8. Okay, my next one is 1/3 compared to 7/10. So for this one, I'm going to be doing an area model. So the same thing, I want to make them the same size And I want to make them on top of each other because that will help me compare them easier. Okay, so I'm first going to draw 1/3. So the denominator 3 means to partition it into 3 parts, and the numerator 1 means I have one of them. And then I'm going to compare this to my benchmark fraction of 1/2. So this is 1/2. I can write that here if I'd like. 1/2, 1/3, and then my fraction I'm comparing them to is 7/10. So I might cut this in half, and then I need 5 and 5. So that's not a very even one. Okay, and I have 7 of the parts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so it's clear that 7/10 is larger than 1/2, and 1/2 is larger than 1/3, which means 7/10 is larger than 1/3. So my alligator mouth is going to grab 7/10. Okay, let's try some together. So we are on page 26, and here's our first problem. 7/10 compared to 2/4. So let's do this one with the number line first. So remember, we're going to let's draw our 3 number lines and try and make them lined up the best we can on top of each other. So our 3 number lines, they're all going to be one whole. Okay, so my first one is 7/10. So we need to divide our number line into 10 parts, or partition it into tenths. And you might want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parts. And we have 7 of them. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so that is what 7/10 looks like, and I can write it here on the side if we'd like. And then I have our benchmark fraction of 1/2 would be right there, because I'm going to partition it into 2, and then I have one of the 2. And then our fraction we're comparing it to is 2/4. So we have to partition our number line into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and we need to color in 2 of them. Okay, so what I notice here is 1/2 and 2/4 are equal to each other. They're both lined up at the same spot. Those are equivalent fractions, but 7/10 is larger than both of them. So we are going to use the greater than sign and grab 7/10. Okay, let's look at our next one. We have 3/12 compared to 4/10. So for this one, let's use an area model. So we're going to draw our rectangles, and let's try and draw 3 of them the same length right on top of each other. Okay, in my first one, my denominator is 12, so we need to partition it into 12ths. So I did it into 4ths, and now each one of these needs to be into 1/3. And that would give me 12 pieces. So I have 3 of the 12. That's what 3/12 looks like. And then I'm going to do 1/2 and 4/10. So 1/2 means we're going to partition it into 2 pieces and color in 1. And 4/10 means we're going to partition it into 10 pieces. So we can do 2 and then 5 and 5. And remember, the goal is always to get them as close to possible, but they're not going to be exact. So as close to equal. So that I have 4/10. So this one's kind of close, but it's still pretty clear they're both smaller than 1/2, but 4/10 is larger than 3/12. It's larger than 3/12, and I can see when they're kind of lined up like that. So I'm going to grab the 4/10, which means I'm using the less than sign. Okay, when you work on the next few pages, I want you to make sure you're trying sometimes the number line and trying sometimes the area model. That will help you be more successful when we take tests. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.